UFC most insane and controversial moments explained. Picture this. You're watching what seems like a normal UFC fight, and then bam, something so absolutely bonkers happens that you're left staring at your screen, wondering if you just witnessed reality or some fever dream. Well, buckle up, fight fans, because today we're diving deep into the most curious, controversial, and downright insane moments that have ever gone down inside the octagon. I'm talking about moments so wild that they're still being debated in MMA forums at 3 a.m. Referee mistakes so bad they made grown men cry. Decisions so controversial that even your grandmother who's never watched a fight would call BS. And incidents so bizarre that Hollywood couldn't write them better. But here's the thing. These aren't just random chaotic moments. Each one reveals something deeper about the sport we love and why MMA continues to be the most unpredictable show on earth. The referee disasters that broke the internet. Let's start with Mario Yamasaki, nicknamed the Heart Attack Referee. This guy was responsible for some of the most cringe-worthy late stoppages in UFC history. The absolute worst, Valentina Shevchenko versus Priscilla Cachoeira at UFC 196. Guys, I'm not exaggerating when I say this was painful to watch. Cachoeira absorbed over 200 strikes before Yamasaki finally decided to stop the fight. Shevchenko was basically playing target practice with this poor woman's face, and Yamasaki was standing there like he was watching a chess match. The crowd was booing, commentators were losing their minds, and even Shevchenko looked confused about why the fight was still going. After this disaster, Yamasaki was essentially banned from UFC events. Then there's Steve Mazzagatti and the John Jones versus Matt Hamill disaster in 2009. Jones was absolutely demolishing Hamill, looking like a video game character on easy mode. Then Jones throws some downward elbows and Mazzagatti disqualifies him. Here's the kicker. This remains John Jones' only official loss on his record. The greatest light heavyweight of all time has one loss because of a referee decision that 99% of MMA fans think was complete garbage. What do you think, fight fans? Should referees face more consequences for these kinds of mistakes? The judging robberies that made us question reality. Leonard Garcia was a fun fighter to watch, but this dude benefited from more questionable decisions than a mob accountant. The most infamous? His split decision win over Nam Phan at the Ultimate Fighter 12 finale. I put win in quotes because literally everyone who watched that fight thought Phan won clearly. The crowd was booing so loud you couldn't hear the decision being announced. Even Garcia looked surprised. He got his hand raised. Diego Sanchez's decision, win over Ross Pearson at UFC Fight Night 72, was so bad that even hardcore Diego fans were scratching their heads. Pearson outlanded him, controlled the octagon, and looked like the clear winner, but somehow Diego got the nod. The best part? Diego celebrated with his signature, yes, cartwheel, completely oblivious to the fact that half the arena was booing the decision. The bizarre incidents that defied explanation. December 28, 2013, UFC 168. Anderson Silva versus Chris Weidman 2. Silva threw a leg kick, something he'd done thousands of times before. Weidman checked it, a basic defensive technique. But this time, physics decided to remind everyone that bones aren't indestructible. The sound was the worst part, that sickening crack that echoed through the MGM Grand. Silva's leg bent at an angle that legs aren't supposed to bend. The spider was writhing on the canvas with his leg looking like a broken tree branch. What made it even more surreal was Silva trying to stand up, not realizing the extent of the injury. Now let's lighten the mood with Derek Lewis and his post-fight interview after knocking out Alexander Volkov. Instead of the usual speech, Lewis started stripping down in the octagon. When Joe Rogan asked why he was getting naked on live television, Lewis delivered one of the greatest quotes in UFC history. "My balls was hot." That's it. No elaborate explanation. Just a man whose balls were hot and needed some air conditioning. The crowd erupted, Joe Rogan couldn't stop laughing, and a meme was born. In a sport full of manufactured drama, here was a guy just keeping it 100% real about his testicular temperature. The Conor McGregor bus attack, April 5th, 2018, Barclays Center, Brooklyn. McGregor, upset about his teammate Artem Lobov being confronted by Khabib, decided to take matters into his own hands. But instead of handling it like a normal person, Conor went full Hollywood action movie. He showed up with a crew of about 20 people, got past security, and made his way to the loading dock where a bus full of UFC fighters was preparing to leave. Then, in a moment of pure insanity, McGregor picked up a metal dolly and hurled it through the bus window. The footage is absolutely wild. You see this bus full of professional fighters ducking for cover as glass explodes everywhere. Michael Chiesa got cut up by the flying glass. Ray Borg got glass in his eye and had to pull out of his fight. McGregor seemed genuinely surprised when he got arrested. Like, what did you think was going to happen, Conor? The whole incident was so over the top that it felt like a scene from a bad action movie. But the consequences were very real. Criminal charges, lawsuits, and multiple fights getting cancelled. UFC 229, the brawl that broke the internet, October 6th, 2018. The most anticipated fight in UFC history became the most controversial post-fight incident in UFC history. Khabib had just submitted McGregor, settling their bitter rivalry in dominant fashion. But instead of celebrating like a normal champion, Khabib threw his mouthpiece at McGregor's corner, then literally jumped over the octagon fence and attacked Dylan Dennis. What followed was absolute chaos. While Khabib was brawling with Dennis outside the cage, members of his team jumped into the cage and started attacking McGregor. It was like a scene from a prison riot, except it was happening at the biggest UFC event of the year. Khabib refused to put on the championship belt afterward. He was so heated about everything that had happened, the bus attack, the personal insults, the trash talk about his family and religion, that he couldn't even enjoy his moment of triumph. The Nevada State Athletic Commission withheld both fighters' purses and handed out suspensions. Looking back, you can understand Khabib's frustration. McGregor had crossed every line imaginable, but jumping into the crowd, that was next level crazy, even by UFC standards. The Jorge Masvidal 3-piece and a soda incident, March 16, 2019. UFC Fight Night 147, London. Masvidal had just knocked out Darren Till, but the real fireworks happened backstage. Leon Edwards decided to confront Masvidal during a post-fight interview and started talking trash. Big mistake. Masvidal, still riding the adrenaline high, turned around and threw a quick 3-punch combination that caught Edwards completely off guard. Then, in one of the coldest lines in UFC history, Masvidal looked at the camera and said, "That was a 3-piece and a soda." The whole thing happened so fast that most people didn't realize what was going on until they saw the replay. Edwards was left looking confused and embarrassed, while Masvidal walked away like nothing happened. He delivered that line like he was ordering at KFC. Not like he had just sucker punched another professional fighter on live television. Derek Lewis, my balls was hot. After all that heavy stuff, let's lighten the mood with one of the most unintentionally hilarious moments in UFC history. Derek Lewis, the heavyweight knockout artist from Houston, had just finished another opponent with his signature walk-off power and was doing his post-fight interview with Joe Rogan. Now, post-fight interviews usually follow a pretty standard script. Fighter thanks their team, talks about their game plan, maybe calls out their next opponent. Standard stuff. But instead of following the usual playbook, Lewis started stripping down in the octagon, shorts off, everything hanging out, while Joe Rogan tried to maintain some semblance of professionalism on live television. The crowd was going wild, not sure if they should be laughing or looking away. Rogan, being the professional he is, tried to redirect the interview while Lewis continued his impromptu strip show. When Joe finally asked the obvious question, why he was getting naked on live television in front of thousands of people, Lewis delivered one of the greatest quotes in UFC history, "My balls was hot." That's it. No elaborate explanation, no deep philosophical meaning, no reference to his game plan or his opponent's strategy. Just a man whose balls were hot and needed some air conditioning. The crowd erupted, Joe Rogan couldn't stop laughing, and a meme was born that's still referenced years later. Diego Sanchez, the yes cartwheel controversy. Speaking of controversial decisions, we can't forget Diego Sanchez. Now, I love Diego. The guy's a warrior and a legend who's given us some of the most entertaining fights in UFC history. but he was on the receiving end of some very generous scorecards throughout his career, and none more generous than his decision win over Ross Pearson at UFC Fight Night 72. This fight was so one-sided that even hardcore Diego fans were scratching their heads. Pearson outlanded him significantly, controlled the octagon for most of the fight, and looked like the clear winner in every meaningful statistical category. He was boxing Diego up, making him miss, and generally putting on a clinic. But somehow, some way, Diego got the nod from 2 of the 3 judges. The decision was so bad that it sparked immediate controversy, with MMA media members and fans alike calling it one of the worst robberies they'd ever seen. The best part? Diego celebrated with his signature, yes, cartwheel, completely oblivious to the fact that half the arena was booing the decision. You gotta respect the confidence, even if the scorecards were questionable. Diego was out there doing cartwheels while the entire MMA community was losing their minds over the injustice. This decision was particularly frustrating because it highlighted everything wrong with MMA judging. The judges seemed to be scoring Diego's aggression and forward pressure over Pearson's actual effective striking and octagon control. It was old school boxing judging applied to a modern MMA fight, and it made no sense. Well, let's be serious again. The Jon Jones eye poke epidemic. We can't talk about UFC controversies without mentioning Jon Jones and his finger problem. The man has been involved in more eye poke incidents than an optometrist's office. The most notorious examples came during his rivalry with Daniel Cormier. In both fights, Jones seemed to have unusual amounts of accidental eye contact with DC's corneas. The worst part, Jones actually admitted in an interview that he uses the eye poke technique, saying, "It's very illegal, but I do it." Wait, what? Did the greatest light heavyweight just admit to cheating on camera? The MMA community went ballistic. The eye poke issue became such a problem that the UFC changed their gloves to try to prevent it, but Jones kept finding ways to get his fingers in people's faces. What's your opinion on this, fight fans? Accidents or something more deliberate? Recent controversies, 2024's wild moments. Even in 2024, the UFC continues providing head-scratching moments. The Juliana Pena versus Raquel Pennington decision at UFC 307 was so controversial that 96% of media members disagreed with the judges' scorecards. Most people thought Pennington had clearly won. She was more active, landed cleaner shots, and controlled the octagon. But somehow, Pena got the nod. Social media exploded with outrage. MMA journalists called it one of the worst decisions of the year, and even casual fans were up in arms. It's moments like these that remind us why MMA judging remains one of the sport's biggest problems. Why these moments matter. These controversial moments reveal the human drama that makes MMA so compelling. Behind all the athletic competition, you've got real people with real emotions making split-second decisions under incredible pressure. When Yamasaki failed to stop that Shevchenko fight, it wasn't just a referee mistake. It was a reminder that people responsible for fighter safety are human and fallible. When Khabib jumped the cage, it wasn't just a post-fight brawl, it was months of personal animosity boiling over. These moments show why MMA is different from other sports. In football, the worst controversy is a bad call. In MMA, you get bus attacks, post-fight riots, and fighters admitting to illegal techniques on live television. The business side of controversy. Let's be real, controversy sells. The UFC knows this and isn't afraid to lean into it. McGregor's bus attack was a disaster from legal and safety standpoints, but it generated millions in free publicity. When UFC 229 finally happened, it broke every pay-per-view record. The UFC walks a fine line between promoting genuine competition and manufacturing drama. Sometimes that line gets crossed, and we end up with situations that go way beyond sports entertainment. What makes a moment truly controversial? After analyzing these incidents, 3 elements make a UFC moment truly controversial. First, it must involve a clear injustice that affects the outcome. Second, it must have lasting consequences that change careers or force the sport to evolve. Third, it must divide the fan base with passionate disagreement that lasts for years. The silver lining. Here's the thing about controversial moments. They've made the UFC better. Every major controversy has led to improvements. Referee disasters led to better training. Judging controversies pushed for more qualified judges. Fighter misconduct resulted in stricter codes of conduct. Even the most frustrating moments serve a purpose. They remind us that MMA is still evolving. Every controversy is a learning opportunity, even if it doesn't feel that way in the moment. So there you have it, fight fans. The most controversial moments in UFC history, from referee disasters to judging robberies, from bizarre incidents to full-scale riots. The Octagon has seen it all. What's the most controversial UFC moment I missed? What decision still makes your blood boil? Drop your picks in the comments below. I guarantee there are wild stories I didn't cover. If you enjoyed this deep dive into UFC chaos, smash that like button and subscribe for more MMA content. Let me know what you want to see next. Most overrated fighters, biggest what-if moments. Your suggestions drive the content. Remember, controversy is part of what makes this sport compelling. Without these wild moments, MMA would just be another predictable competition. Instead, we get a sport where anything can happen, where careers change in an instant, and where the most memorable moments often happen outside the actual fighting. That's what makes us MMA fans. We're here for the human drama, the unexpected moments, and yes, even the controversies that keep us arguing for years. Until next time, keep watching, keep arguing, and keep loving this beautiful, chaotic sport we call mixed martial arts.